Paul, thank you so much for joining us. There's so much talk. Now, okay, it's September. These guys are getting back to work. They have to talk about the financial transaction tax. They have talks about deficits.
Sure.
What about the IMF? Are we going to see a little bit of the headway?
Sure.
Are the Europeans going to give up some of the seats in favor of the emerging countries?
Well, they have a very busy day ahead of them, obviously, and no one was really expecting this IMF issue to explode in the way that it has. I think this one's been knocking around for about 15 or 20 years, Francine. A lot of talk about the EU coming together and having a common seat, by the way, which if they could agree to have a common seat at the IMF.
But are they going to agree?
Well, I'm not sure they will. This is the point. It's for 15 or 20 years there's been in some ways the vision of that. The EU would have a larger voting share than the United States and would become only the second nation or bloc that would enjoy a veto at the IMF. So they have a very large incentive to do it. But they just can't get over those national interests there. No one wants to give up their seat in order to gain more power for the bloc as a whole.
But you were saying, really, we didn't expect this, really. It's the US that kind of has pushed
Sure.
the EU into a corner. What does it mean for EU-US relations? And are we going to still see a divergence on this, financial transaction tax?
Well, I think regarding the IMF, I think you will find a solution to this at some point, and mostly because everyone knows the problem is the EU has been slow to agree to this. And by the way, it's not the first time. I think the U.S. is really just trying to force the issue. I don't see a fundamental disagreement underneath it. But that said, we've seen other issues like that knock around the EU forever. You haven't asked me about the famous patent, which we've been working on for 40 years. It's not clear how quickly we can get a common view on this. I think the ECOFIN has a lot to talk about. The main issue is one you didn't even mention, which is going to be the economic governance and coordination, which they will start with tonight. The proposals there seem ripe for an agreement of some sort, and I think they'll get one.
Yeah, and also on the Stability Pact, but at the end of the day, these are talks. We're not possibly going to get anything concrete because it needs 2-3 months of negotiations.
Well, that's probably right, but I think when the finance ministers have signed off on some of this, that's a good sign that we will have made it a long way towards some sort of an agreement. It's an important, almost final stage in the process.
So what exactly is the most essential thing that we can get out of these two-day meetings?
Sure. I think you will see much closer economic governance starting to emerge from this. They've had, you mentioned just coming back from the summer, but they've actually been talking about this quietly, privately, at working group level all summer long, and there is a package on the table that will likely go through in some form or another.
Well, concretely, what does that actually mean? That tomorrow we can have some kind of text that will be adopted, that will then be adopted?
Oh, you're asking me about the tax. I was speaking about the governance mechanisms. I think that they're very hesitant to move into the area of substance and decisions. And what I mean is I think the tax they'll talk about a while longer. For the moment, what they're talking about are procedural changes, but be under no illusion, these are important procedural changes. They would give more power to them collectively as a body to take decisions in some of these areas before they then go on to discuss it. I don't think they're quite there on a tax. You see very large disagreements among the member states, and not so much over the tax. I think there's more or less a sense that something's going to have to happen, but over how that money will be used. A lot of the finance ministries want to retain it for the national treasuries. They don't want to see these big pools of cash sent out there that they can't get their hands on in a time when every finance ministry is trying to fill holes.
And on the Growth and Stability Pact, we have a joint, front, French and the Italians and the Germans saying, well, guys, we need to check on what the neighbors are doing more closely. Are we going to get anything on that?
Well, one of the problems with the EU are the expectations people have for it. I mean, there's a tendency to act like the EU is a federal government or something, which it certainly isn't. It's actually 27 governments with very peculiar interests trying to find an agreement. And they've actually made it pretty far. Now, it's maybe not as far as some would have liked, but it actually is a step forward in terms of how they can look at each other's budgets, what kinds of threats they can hold against each other, how much they can actually meddle in what up until now have been very clearly domestic decisions. I do think we will see some sort of, if not an announcement, a very firm endorsement of that.
Thank you very much, Paul Hofheinz.